The night before my daughter's wedding, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "If you can't follow all 25 conditions, don't come." I waited until I was back in my old pickup truck before opening the envelope. I read the entire list, didn't argue, didn't call, and didn't explain. I simply booked the earliest flight to Maui, Hawaii. When my plane landed, my phone showed 65 missed calls from my daughter, and I knew something no one expected had just happened at her wedding. Before we go any further, I'm so grateful you're here with me today. Drop a comment and tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Your city, your country, I'd love to know. Every single response means the world to me. A quick note. This story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and meaningful storytelling. Names and settings are coincidental, but everything it's trying to tell you, that part is worth keeping. The morning of June 14th started the way most mornings in my life have started, quietly, without ceremony, without anyone paying much attention to what I was doing or where I was going. It was 6:47 in the morning Hawaiian Standard Time when the wheels of the plane touched down on the runway at Kahului Airport. The jolt woke the man sitting next to me, a heavy-set businessman who had been snoring softly since somewhere over the Pacific. He grabbed his armrest with both hands, blinked twice, and let out a short, embarrassed laugh. I had been awake the entire flight. I turned off airplane mode. The screen did not simply light up. It detonated. Notifications hit the display so fast and so hard that the phone vibrated continuously against my palm, like something desperate to escape a trapped animal shaking itself raw against the bars of a cage. I wrapped my fingers around it and held on, watching the numbers stack up one after another. Emily Carter, 12 missed calls. Ryan Brooks, 8 missed calls. A number I didn't recognize, area code 206 Seattle, 7 calls. Then 4 more from a second unknown number. Then Ryan again. Then a third unfamiliar number calling twice in a row, back to back, like whoever it was couldn't believe I wasn't picking up. I counted the way I used to count measurements back in my engineering days, methodically, without rushing, because hurrying a count never once changed the number at the end. 65 missed calls, 93 minutes. The flight attendant, a young woman with the kind of tired professionalism that comes from too many red-eye shifts, leaned across the aisle and looked at me with genuine concern, pulling at the corners of her eyes. "Sir, are you feeling all right? You've gone a little pale." I looked up from the screen and gave her a steady smile. "I'm doing just fine," I said. "Thank you for checking." She held my gaze for a half-second longer than necessary, the way people do when they're not entirely convinced, then moved on down the aisle. I tucked the phone into the front pocket of my jacket, unclipped my seatbelt, and pulled my carry-on from the overhead bin. The man next to me was still rubbing sleep from his eyes. Around us, people were already jostling for position in the aisle elbows, out carry-ons swinging that particular brand of airport aggression that emerges the moment a plane stops moving. I waited until the rush cleared, then walked off at my own pace. Outside the terminal, Hawaii came at me all at once, warm, salt air wrapping around my shoulders, like something welcoming, the smell of plumeria drifting from a garden. I couldn't locate the sun sitting low and golden over the West Maui Mountains, like it had been waiting there specifically for this moment. I stood on the arrivals curb with my roller bag beside me and breathed in slowly through my nose. A cab pulled forward. The driver was a broad-shouldered man with a sunburned neck, a University of Hawaii sticker peeling off his dashboard, and the unhurried manner of someone who had lived somewhere beautiful long enough to stop being impressed by it. "Where to?" he said. "Maui Shores, South Kihei Road." "Good choice," he said, pulling into traffic without urgency. "Vacation." I looked out the window at the palm trees along the road, their fronds moving in a slow, easy rhythm against the blue sky. "Something like that," I said. He didn't push for more, which I appreciated. We drove in the comfortable quiet of two strangers who had nothing to prove to each other. The coastline opened up to my right, stretches of black lava rock, giving way to pale sand, and beyond that, the ocean so blue, it looked almost deliberate, like someone had chosen the color carefully. Margaret had wanted to come to Maui for 30 years. We had talked about it the way couples talk about things they keep meaning to do someday, when the timing works out, when things slow down a little. Then she got sick. Then she was gone. And I had kept finding reasons not to book the flight, right up until the February night I opened an email from my daughter and found 25 numbered items waiting for me. My phone buzzed again inside my jacket. I didn't take it out. The cab pulled up to the hotel. I checked in, changed into a lighter shirt, and carried my coffee down to the beach. The morning was still fresh, the sand barely touched a few joggers, a man throwing a tennis ball for a golden retriever, who kept overshooting it into the shallow water. A young couple sitting close together on a towel, watching the waves with the unhurried absorption of people who had nowhere else to be. I chose a chair facing the water and sat down. Placed my phone face up on the armrest beside me. It buzzed. Emily again. Call number 14. I watched her name pulse on the screen and felt something I hadn't fully expected, not the satisfaction I might have anticipated, not the clean, sharp edge of righteous anger, but something heavier and older sitting low in my sternum, like a stone that had been there a long time, and I had simply learned to carry. My daughter was 3,000 miles away, in a ballroom full of white flowers and crystal champagne flutes, calling a phone that wasn't going to answer, and every single thing that had led to this moment had been a choice, hers, mine, both of ours stretching back further than either of us would probably want to admit. "That phone sure is working hard," said a voice nearby. A woman in her mid-70s broad sun hat, a paperback face down in her lap, had settled into the chair 2 spots over with the easy authority of someone who had claimed that stretch of beach long before I arrived. "It is," I agreed. "Family?" she asked. Not nosily, just the way people her age ask things directly, because they've run out of patience for circling around the obvious. "My daughter." She picked up her paperback. "Ah," she said. One syllable. The kind that carries an entire conversation inside it. By 9:15, the calls had stopped. 65 in total. The last one from the unknown 206 number rang 4 times, surrendered to voicemail, and went silent. The beach filled gradually with the sounds of a regular Tuesday morning, children laughing somewhere down the shoreline, a vendor setting up rental umbrellas, somebody on a balcony above playing guitar with more enthusiasm than skill. I picked up my phone one final time, looked at the screen, and pressed the power button until it went dark. "You know what the most powerful thing in the world is?" I said to the woman in the sun hat. Or maybe to Margaret. Or maybe just to the ocean, which had the decency not to have an opinion. The woman glanced over. "Tell me." I set the dark phone down on the armrest. "Knowing exactly what you're not going to do." She thought about that for a moment, then turned back to her book with the small nod of someone who had filed the information away for later. A wave rolled in and pulled slowly back. Somewhere behind me, the hotel was waking up. Somewhere ahead of me, the ocean went on without end. And somewhere back in Seattle, in a ballroom that had cost more money than most people earn in a decade, something had already gone catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. I was the only person alive who had watched every piece of it fall into place. Watching the pieces fall into place doesn't happen in a single dramatic moment. It happens the way weather changes in the Pacific Northwest, gradually, almost imperceptibly, 1 degree at a time, until one morning you step outside and realize a storm has been building for months, and you simply didn't want to name it. It started on the night of February 17th. I was at my desk in the small back room I use as a home office, the one with the window facing the backyard, and the oak tree that Margaret planted the year we moved into this house, back when Emily was still small enough to need a step stool to reach the kitchen counter. It was close to 11 at night. I had been reading a structural engineering manual, The kind of thing most people find deeply uninteresting, and I find oddly comforting when Emily's name appeared in my inbox. The subject line read, "Dad important, please read before responding." I set the manual down and opened it. The email was long, precisely organized, numbered from 1 to 25 like a formal document, which I suppose is exactly what it was. I read the first item, "No outdated clothing," and felt a faint tension gather across the back of my shoulders, the body's quiet way of registering what the mind hasn't fully processed yet. I kept reading. Item 3, no seat at the family table. Item 7, use the side entrance to the venue. Item 11, do not initiate conversation with guests from Ryan's side of the family. Item 16, do not bring personal photographs. Item 19, do not reference events from the past. I read each one the way I read engineering specifications, carefully, completely without skipping. Item 25 stopped me cold. After the wedding, please remove yourself from our lives. This is not a request. I read it once, then again, then a third time in case the words meant something different on a third pass. They did not. I sat back in my chair and looked out the window at the bare oak tree in the backyard. February in Portland strips the trees down to nothing but branches, just the skeleton of the thing, standing there in the dark, waiting for a season that hasn't arrived yet. I closed the laptop, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and drank it standing at the sink, looking at nothing. Went to bed. I did not respond to the email that night. I did not call Emily the following morning or the morning after that, because I understood, with the kind of quiet, unshakable certainty that comes from 69 years of watching people show you exactly who they are, that words would not reach the place this needed to reach. What it needed was something else entirely. 3 months later, on a Thursday afternoon in the middle of May, Emily called and asked if I could meet her fiancé for lunch. It was actually Ryan's idea, she said, her voice carrying that particular brightness people use when they want something to sound casual and aren't quite pulling it off. He wants to get to know you a little before the wedding. I'd like that very much, I said. Ryan Brooks was 36 years old, vice president of Brooks Construction Group, one of the most prominent commercial construction firms operating up and down the West Coast, and the only son of its founder, Richard Brooks. I had known about Brooks Construction for 25 years, but Ryan had no way of knowing that. As far as he was aware, he was having lunch with his fiancée's elderly father, a retired engineer who lived alone in a modest house in Portland and drove a truck that was old enough to vote. He walked into the restaurant 11 minutes late. I had been watching the door since noon. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him the way expensive things fit people who have always had them moved through the room with the loose confidence of someone who expected tables to open up ahead of him, and shook my hand in the efficient, distracted way of a man performing a courtesy rather than offering one quick pressure. Quick release eyes already scanning the room before our palms had separated. "Great to finally meet you, Mr. Carter." The word finally landed with a faint but unmistakable weight, the kind that signals a box being checked rather than a moment being welcomed. "Daniel," I said, "please." He sat down, picked up the menu without looking at the prices, and ordered immediately. Then he put the menu down and began to talk. He was good at it, smooth, energetic, the kind of talker who fills a room without seeming to try. He talked about the company's expansion into Arizona and Nevada, about a new commercial development breaking ground in Bellevue, about his vision for restructuring the leadership pipeline once he moved into the CEO position. I listened. I asked an occasional question. He answered each one with the generous patience of a man who enjoys explaining himself. Then he leaned forward, dropped his voice by half a register, and looked at me with the conspiratorial expression of someone about to share something that would impress. "I'll tell you something. Daniel, and this is still under wraps for now, we're finalizing a major acquisition this summer. A merger, actually. $480 million. He let the number sit there for a moment, like a gift placed on a table. "We're planning to make the announcement at the wedding reception. Big investors will be in the room, both families will be there. It's the perfect moment, going to reshape the entire company." "That's an extraordinary deal," I said. His chest lifted slightly. "It's the deal," he said. "My father built something great, I'll always give him that. But there's a ceiling on what the old approach can achieve. Sometimes the next generation has to be willing to move faster than the last one did." He smiled at me across the table, open, confident, entirely unaware of anything beneath the surface of the conversation. "No offense to your generation, of course." "None taken," I said. I thought about Richard Brooks in the winter of 2000. A man standing in a half-empty office with $3 million of debt and no runway left. I thought about the check I had written without telling anyone except Margaret and Robert Hayes, the check drawn from the settlement I had received 2 years earlier when the engineering firm I co-founded was acquired, and I walked away with more money than I had ever expected to hold in my life. I thought about 25 years of quarterly statements arriving in Robert's office, the numbers growing larger every year, while I stayed in the same house, drove the same truck, planted tomatoes in the same garden. When the check came, Ryan reached for it before I could. A gesture that felt less like generosity and more like the quiet establishment of who was in charge at this table. He stood, shook my hand in the same efficient way, and delivered his parting words with the breezy finality of a man wrapping up a meeting that had gone exactly as expected. "Good to meet you, sir. Emily mentioned you used to be an engineer." Used to be. 2 words. Past tense. The label of a man whose useful years were behind him. "I was," I said, "for quite a long time." He nodded, satisfied, uncurious, and walked out. I sat back down and wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. The restaurant moved around me at its ordinary afternoon pace. A couple 2 tables over laughed at something on a shared phone screen. The server came by and topped off my water without being asked, the small, wordless kindness of someone good at their job. I pulled out my phone and typed a text to Robert Hayes, my lawyer, my closest friend for over 30 years, the only man alive who held the full picture of who I actually was. The message was 4 words. "Call me tonight. Urgent." His reply arrived in 50 seconds, already figured. 7 o'clock. I left the restaurant, walked to my truck, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. The May afternoon sun came in flat and warm through the windshield. I reached into the glove compartment and took out the photograph I kept there, Margaret, mid-laugh, hair blown sideways by a wind that had long since stopped blowing. Sometime in the mid-90s, when the world was simpler, and so were we. "He called me used to be," I told her. I could almost hear her laughing back at me from across whatever distance separates the living from the dead. I put the photograph away, turned the key in the ignition, and sat for a moment longer. Margaret used to ask me why I kept the old truck, why I stayed in the same house, why I never moved somewhere larger or newer after the money came. The answer was always the same, because the man I wanted to be had nothing to prove to anyone. I drove home to make the call that would set everything in motion. Robert Hayes picked up on the first ring. "I've been waiting for this call since February," he said, skipping the hello entirely the way he always did when something serious was already in motion. Robert had been my lawyer for 31 years, and my closest friend for longer than that, the kind of man who answered the phone at 7 in the evening with the same focused attention he gave a deposition at 9 in the morning. "You read the email?" "I read the email," I said. "All 25 items, every single one." I heard him exhale, not dramatically, just the quiet release of a man confirming something he had already suspected. "Daniel," he said carefully, "what do you want to do?" I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold in front of me. Outside the window, the oak tree in the backyard stood perfectly still in the evening air. I had been thinking about this question since the moment I closed the laptop 3 months ago. And I had arrived at the answer the same way I arrived at most important answers in my life, not through anger, not through impulse, but through a long patient period of sitting very quietly with an uncomfortable truth until I knew it well enough to act on it. "Ryan told me something at lunch today," I said. "Something he shouldn't have told a retired engineer who drives an old truck and doesn't matter." Robert caught on instantly. I could hear the shift in his attention through the phone, the slight straightening that happens when a good lawyer realizes a conversation has just become significant. "Tell me," he said. I laid it out for him, and the merger, the $480 million, the plan to announce it at the wedding reception in front of investors and family alike. I told him about the way Ryan had leaned forward like a man sharing classified information with someone too unimportant to be a threat. I told him about the word "finally" in the handshake and used to be in the goodbye. Robert didn't say anything for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped a register. "Daniel, you have 23.7% of that company. If you file a formal objection through my office, you can legally freeze the merger vote. They cannot proceed without majority shareholder approval, and with your stake, you have more than enough leverage to force a delay." "I know," I said. "You've always known." "Yes, so the question isn't whether you can do it," Robert said slowly. "The question is whether you want to do it on the morning of your daughter's wedding while you're sitting on a beach in Hawaii." "Maui specifically," I said. Robert let out a short, sharp laugh, the kind that isn't entirely comfortable. "You've already booked the flight. 2 days ago. Lord Daniel." I heard the leather of his chair creak as he leaned back. "You want the freeze order to hit at 10 o'clock, 1 hour after the ceremony starts. I want them to have absolutely no time to scramble," I said. "I want the investors to be standing in the lobby. I want the flowers to be fresh. And I want Emily to find out who her father actually is in the same hour that she finds out her wedding reception is falling apart." The line went quiet for a beat, not hesitation, just Robert processing the full architecture of what I was describing. Then he said, "There are 2 letters." "Yes, one for Emily." "1 sentence," I said. "She'll understand it." "And one for Richard Brooks." "That one needs to be formal," I said. "Professional. It goes through your office. It arrives at the venue by courier at 9:55, 5 minutes before the freeze kicks in. Richard needs to see it before his team does." "What do you want it to say?" I looked out at the oak tree. Margaret had planted it with a hand trowel the weekend after we moved in 32 years ago. Emily had been 4 years old and spent the whole afternoon trying to help by patting the dirt with a plastic spade. I had forgotten that until just now, and the memory hit me somewhere behind the sternum with a quiet, specific pain that I hadn't been expecting. "Tell Richard that the freeze is not personal," I said. "Tell him I have respected what he built for 25 years. Tell him I will be in contact when I return." I paused. "And sign it with my full name. No more Robert Hayes, LLC, Daniel Carter. Let them figure out the rest." "They will figure it out very fast," Robert said. "That's the point. We spent another 40 minutes working through the logistics, the legal language of the freeze order, the courier timing the specific account structure that would make the withdrawal unambiguous and airtight. Robert had handled my affairs for 3 decades, and he was meticulous in the way that only people who genuinely love their work ever are. By the time we hung up, it was nearly 9 o'clock, and my coffee was completely cold. I poured it down the sink and stood at the kitchen window for a moment, looking out at the dark backyard. Then I walked to my desk and took out 2 sheets of plain white paper and a pen, not a printer, not a laptop, just a pen, because some things need to be handwritten to mean what they're supposed to mean. The letter to Richard took me 20 minutes. I rewrote it 3 times until the tone was exactly right, firm, but not hostile, clear, but not cruel. The letter to Emily took me 4 minutes, 1 sentence. I read it back to myself once, folded the paper in thirds, and slid it into an envelope. I wrote her name on the outside in careful block letters. Then I set both envelopes on the corner of my desk, placed Margaret's photograph on top of them, so I wouldn't forget, and went to bed. I slept better that night than I had in months. The evening of June 13th, I drove to Seattle. I left Portland just after 4 in the afternoon, taking I-5 north, the way I had taken it 100 times over the years, for engineering conferences, for hospital visits, when Margaret was sick, for the occasional Sunday drive, when the house got too quiet, and I needed the motion of the road to think. The drive up was 2.5 hours in light traffic, and I spent most of it with the radio off, watching the landscape shift from the dry green hills south of the city to the flat gray sprawl of the suburbs, and then finally to the downtown skyline rising up against a sky that couldn't decide between clouds and clarity. The Emerald Grand sat on 4th Avenue, 42 floors of glass and steel, with a lobby that smelled of fresh lilies and money. I had looked it up online when Emily first mentioned the venue. The ballroom rental alone started at $18,000 a night. I had not mentioned this to anyone. I parked in the garage across the street, rode the elevator up to the 12th floor, and walked down a hallway lined with white floral arrangements so dense the air felt thick with their perfume. From behind one of the doors, near the end of the corridor, I could hear music, something upbeat, women laughing, the particular noise of a group of people collectively convincing themselves that tomorrow was going to be perfect. I stopped in front of room 1208 and knocked. 30 seconds passed. Then the door swung open, and Emily stood there in a silk robe with her hair half-pinned, a glass of champagne in one hand, and mascara being applied to her left eye by a bridesmaid, who was forced to freeze mid-stroke when the door opened. Emily's expression moved through 3 things in less than 2 seconds: surprise, a flash of something that might have been genuine warmth, and then the quick, practiced rearrangement into careful neutrality that I had been watching her perform for years whenever I showed up somewhere she hadn't fully planned for. Her eyes dropped to my jacket, my slacks, my shoes. Then she glanced over my shoulder into the hallway to see if anyone from Ryan's family might be nearby. "Dad," she said, "I didn't know you were coming tonight. I wanted to see you before tomorrow," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected, given what was sitting in my jacket pocket. "I won't stay long." She stepped back to let me in, and the bridesmaid tactfully invented a reason to disappear into the bathroom. The room was spectacular in the way that expensive things are spectacular: high ceilings, an enormous arrangement of white peonies on the central table, Emily's wedding gown hanging in its garment bag against the wardrobe like a ghost of tomorrow morning, champagne bottles sweating gently in their ice buckets. The kind of room that had been built to make people feel like their lives were cinematic. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out a small velvet box, the kind that jewelers use, navy blue, worn soft at the corners from years of being handled. I held it out to Emily. She looked at it, without taking it immediately, the way people look at things they can't quite categorize. "What is this?" "Open it." She set her champagne glass down on the vanity and took the box with both hands. When she lifted the lid, her breath caught a sharp, involuntary intake that she couldn't have controlled if she'd tried. Inside, on a bed of white satin, lay a delicate gold chain with a small oval locket that she had seen around her mother's neck every single day of her childhood. "Dad." Her voice cracked on the single syllable, and she pressed her lips together hard, fighting something that was trying to come up from somewhere deep. Her eyes went glassy and bright all at once. "This was Mom's. She told me to give it to you on your wedding day," I said. "I've been holding on to it for 8 years. Emily looked down at the locket in her hands, and for a moment, just a moment, she was not the woman who had written 25 numbered conditions on a February night. She was the girl who used to reach up and touch that locket when Margaret held her close, the small fingers wrapping around gold that they associated with safety and warmth and being completely loved. Her chin trembled once before she got control of it, and she blinked fast several times like someone trying to clear water from their eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice had gone thin and unsteady in a way I hadn't heard in years. I thank you, Dad. I nodded once. Then I reached into my other jacket pocket and took out 2 envelopes. I placed them carefully on the corner of the vanity table, one with Emily's name on it, in my handwriting, one with Richard Brooks printed neatly across the front. The one for Mr. Brooks is a personal note, I said, keeping my voice easy and unhurried. A separate matter from anything business-related, just something I wanted him to have from me directly in my own hand. Would you mind passing it along to him tomorrow, before the ceremony starts, if possible? The formal correspondence will find him through other channels. Emily wiped quickly at the corner of one eye with the back of her wrist, the gesture of someone who has just remembered they're wearing mascara. She looked at the 2 envelopes, then back at me. Of course, she said. The other one is for you, I said. Don't open it tonight. Save it for after. Something shifted in her face, not suspicion exactly, more like the unconscious registering of a weight in a conversation that she couldn't quite locate. After the ceremony. After, I said. There's no rush. I picked up her champagne glass from the vanity, held it out to her. And when she took it, I put my other hand briefly over hers, just for a second. The kind of contact that says something that doesn't have words. Her fingers were cold from the glass. I could feel her pulse jumping lightly against the back of my hand. You're going to be beautiful tomorrow, I said. Her eyes filled up again completely, and this time she couldn't blink it back fast enough. A single tear broke loose and ran down her cheek, and she laughed a little at herself for letting it, the broken, half-embarrassed laugh of someone caught feeling more than they intended to. Dad, you're going to make me redo my makeup. I'll let you get back to it, I said. I turned and walked to the door. My hand found the handle cool and solid under my palm. Behind me, I could hear Emily setting her glass down, the soft sound of the velvet box being closed, the bridesmaid reappearing from the bathroom with carefully staged obliviousness. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway without looking back. The corridor was empty in both directions. The floral arrangements stood in their perfect white rows, filling the air with their heavy sweetness. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and stood watching the numbers descend. My chest felt like something had been removed from it, not painfully, just the hollow echoing sensation of a space where something used to be and wasn't anymore. The elevator arrived. I stepped in. The doors closed. In less than 12 hours, Emily would open that envelope, and everything she thought she knew about her father, about who he was, what he was worth. What she had thrown away would change in the time it took to read a single sentence. I pressed the button for the garage level and watched the floor numbers count down in the small lit panel above the doors. I did not look back up at the 12th floor as I drove out of the garage and pointed my truck south toward home. I was at Portland International by 5 o'clock in the morning. The terminal was half empty at that hour, the particular quiet of a building designed for crowds that hasn't filled up yet, all that space and light and purpose waiting for the day to catch up with it. I checked my single bag, passed through security, and found a seat near my gate with a cup of coffee and nothing left to do but wait. I had set my alarm for 4:15. I did not need it. I had been lying in the dark since 3:47, watching the ceiling and listening to the house settle around me the way old houses do. The small creaks and shifts of wood that I had learned to read, the way sailors read weather. Each sound a piece of information about a structure I knew better than any other on earth. Margaret used to say that house talked to us. I believe she was right. My flight boarded at 5:50. I was in seat 2, a window left side, the Pacific stretching out below once we cleared the coast. The woman in 2B was a young attorney from the look of her briefcase and the thickness of the documents she spread across her tray table within 30 seconds of sitting down. She glanced at me once, assessed correctly that I was not going to make conversation, and went back to her work. I appreciated that about strangers on airplanes. The temporary wordless agreement to simply coexist. Somewhere over the Pacific, my phone showed 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock in Portland meant 9 o'clock in Seattle, same time zone 200 miles apart. And at this exact moment in the ballroom of the Emerald Grand on 4th Avenue, a string quartet would be playing something tasteful while 200 guests found their seats, and Emily walked down an aisle covered in white rose petals that cost, if I remembered the invoice correctly, $1,100. I turned the thought over in my mind carefully, the way you handle something fragile. Not with bitterness, not with satisfaction. Just the plain, unflinching acknowledgement of what was happening and what was about to happen, separated by exactly 60 minutes. The flight attendant stopped by my row. "Can I get you anything, sir?" "Just water," I said. "Thank you." She poured it and moved on. I held the cold plastic cup in both hands and looked out the window at the ocean, 30,000 feet below, an endless blue-gray expanse that had no opinion about weddings or mergers or fathers who drove old trucks and kept secrets for 25 years. I thought about Robert. At this moment, he would be sitting in his office on the 14th floor of his building on SW 5th Avenue in Portland, drinking the same dark roast he had been drinking every morning since 1987, watching the clock with the focused patience of a man who had spent 3 decades making sure things happened at precisely the right moment. The freeze order was already drafted, signed, and loaded in his system, a formal shareholder notification prepared under Delaware corporate law, which governed Brooks Construction Group's legal structure. All it required was the clock to reach 10. Under Delaware law, a shareholder holding more than 10% of a company's outstanding stock has the legal right to formally object to and demand postponement of any major transaction, including a merger or acquisition, pending a proper shareholder vote with adequate notice. My 23.7% gave me more than enough standing. The notice Robert would send at 10 o'clock would go simultaneously to the company's registered legal counsel, its board secretary, and directly to Richard Brooks as chairman. It would be in the precise and deliberate language of corporate law, completely unanswerable. There was nothing Ryan could do, nothing Emily could do, nothing anyone in that ballroom could do except stand there and absorb the information. My water was gone. I set the empty cup on the tray table and pressed my forehead lightly against the cool of the window glass. Beneath the plane, the ocean went on in every direction without end. "You doing okay over there?" said the attorney in 2B without looking up from her documents. I turned my head and looked at her with mild surprise. "I thought we had a deal," I said. She glanced up, then a small smile pulling at the corner of her mouth. "You've been staring out that window for 40 minutes like you're waiting for something." "I am waiting for something," I said. "Good news or bad news?" I thought about it genuinely for a moment. "Depends on who you ask." She considered that, then went back to her documents with the small nod of someone who had received a satisfying answer. I turned back to the window. 10 o'clock was 22 minutes away. I thought about the morning Margaret was diagnosed, how I had sat in the hospital parking garage for 40 minutes before driving home. Not because I was too devastated to move, but because I needed to understand what I was carrying before I carried it into the house where our daughter was doing homework at the kitchen table. Some moments require that kind of preparation. The space between knowing what's coming and letting it arrive. 22 minutes became 15, became 8, became 3. I did not look at my phone when the clock turned. I did not need to. I simply felt the moment pass quiet and absolute, the way the most significant things usually are, and then sat back in my seat and closed my eyes for the first time since Portland. The flight attendant's voice came over the intercom 20 minutes later, warm and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our initial descent into Maui. Local time is 6:47 in the morning. The weather is beautiful." I opened my eyes. The ocean below had changed color, deeper now, almost turquoise, the water so clear I could see the shadow of the plane moving across it. Ahead, the dark green peaks of the West Maui Mountains rose out of the water, like something that had decided a long time ago to simply stay. In Seattle, the clock had already passed 10. The flowers were still fresh. The champagne was still cold. And somewhere in that ballroom, a phone was ringing. Robert called me at 11:47 in the morning Hawaiian time. I was still on the beach, same chair, a fresh coffee that Marcus had left without being asked. The woman in the sun hat, long gone and replaced by a family with 3 children, who were conducting what appeared to be a very serious architectural project involving wet sand and increasing structural ambition. I had been watching them with the quiet pleasure of a man who had nothing urgent left to do when my phone lit up with Robert's name. I picked up on the second ring. "Tell me," I said. Robert exhaled the particular exhale of a man who has just watched something very carefully planned execute exactly as intended and is experiencing the complicated satisfaction of being right about something he genuinely wished he'd been wrong about. "It went perfectly," he said. "And it was worse than I expected, which means it was exactly what needed to happen." "Start from the beginning," I said. "Everything." He had spoken it turned out to the company's outside legal counsel, a senior partner at a Seattle firm who had called Robert's office at 10:08, 8 minutes after the freeze notice landed, in the clipped and carefully modulated tone of a lawyer who is managing a crisis and does not want the person on the other end of the phone to know quite how large that crisis is. "He asked me to confirm the notice was legitimate," Robert said. "I confirmed it. He asked if my client would consider withdrawing the objection in exchange for a seat at the negotiating table. I told him my client was currently unavailable and would be in contact upon his return." "How did he take that?" "About as well as you'd expect," Robert said dryly. "Now the sequence inside the venue, this came from 2 sources, so I'm confident it's accurate." He laid it out methodically, the way Robert always did, chronologically, factually, without editorializing, which somehow made it land harder than any dramatization could have. At 10:02, Richard Brooks, 68 years old, founder and chairman of Brooks Construction Group, a man who had reportedly not raised his voice in a business setting in over a decade, had stepped away from the head table in the middle of his son's wedding reception, with his phone pressed against his ear and a color in his face that one witness described as the particular gray of a man who has just been told his building is on fire. Ryan had noticed his father leave the table and followed him into the corridor. That was where he heard the word merger spoken in a tone that made his stomach drop. "Ryan apparently grabbed the phone out of his father's hand at one point," Robert said, and I could hear the faint restraint in his voice that meant he was being deliberately careful about how much satisfaction he was allowing himself. The legal counsel on the other end of the line had to ask 3 times who he was speaking to. What did Ryan do when he found out the freeze came from a shareholder holding 23.7% Oston? "He demanded the shareholder's name," Robert said. "The legal counsel told him the shareholder was represented by my office. Ryan typed my name into his phone right there in the corridor. I know this because the counsel told me, and because 30 seconds later, my assistant called to tell me she had received 6 rapid-fire visits to our firm's website from a Seattle IP address. I pressed my free hand flat against the warm armrest of my chair and felt the solid reality of it under my palm. And then Ryan typed Portland, Oregon into his phone, Robert said, and looked at his fiancée's last name, and put those 2 things together. A pause. Daniel the man actually sat down on the floor of the corridor. His father had to ask a passing waiter for a glass of water. Something moved through my chest at that not triumph, not cruelty, but the deep and exhausting ache of a moment that was always going to arrive and had simply finally gotten here. My daughter had spent years being ashamed of a man she had never bothered to know. And now, in a hotel corridor in Seattle, the full weight of that error had landed on her husband's shoulders in front of 200 wedding guests, his father and the investors he had spent months assembling to witness his finest hour. "The venue manager," I said. "What happened there?" Robert cleared his throat. "That's the part that concerns me most from a human standpoint." The hotel's events coordinator approached the family at approximately 10:25 to explain that the primary guarantee card on file, which ran through my corporate account on your behalf as we structured it, had been formally suspended per your instructions. She asked for an alternative payment method to continue services. He paused. There were guests within earshot, several of them. "What did Richard do?" "Richard Brooks handled it with more dignity than most men would have managed," Robert said, and I heard something that sounded almost like respect in his voice. He told the coordinator to give him 15 minutes. He pulled Ryan aside. He spoke very quietly. And then he came back and told the coordinator that the situation was being resolved. Another pause. It was not resolved. I looked out at the ocean. One of the children building the sand structure had just watched a wave take out a corner of their work and was staring at the damage with the stunned expression of someone encountering real loss for the first time. His older sister immediately dropped to her knees and started rebuilding, patting the wet sand back into shape with focused, unhesitating hands. "The guests from Ryan's side," I said. "The investors." "6 of them," Robert confirmed. All present when the coordinator made the second approach at 10:40. At that point, services were formally suspended pending payment. The catering staff stopped passing appetizers. The bar closed. He took a breath. One of the investors, I don't have a name, just that he was apparently a significant one, asked Ryan directly what was happening. Ryan said it was a misunderstanding being handled. The investor looked at him for a moment, then took out his own phone and started making calls. The weight of it settled over me like something physical, heavy and specific, and exactly as large as it needed to be. Ryan had spent months building toward this moment. The perfect venue, the perfect announcement, the perfect audience. And in the span of 40 minutes, every single piece of it had come undone, not dramatically, not with shouting or accusations, but in the quiet, merciless way that real disasters unfold, one unavoidable domino at a time. "Robert," I said. "Emily, when did she find out?" His voice shifted something in it, gentling slightly, in the way it did when he was about to say something he knew would cost me. "That," he said carefully, "is the part I think you need to hear from someone else." "But Daniel," she found the envelope. My hand tightened on the phone. "She read the letter," Robert said. "And then she sat down on the floor of the bridal suite in her wedding dress, and she didn't get up for a very long time." The children on the beach had finished rebuilding their wall. The older girl sat back on her heels and examined her work with a critical eye, then leaned over and said something to her brother that made him break into a wide, gap-toothed grin and start patting the sand again with renewed energy. "Thank you, Robert," I said. "I'll call you tonight." I set the phone down on the armrest and sat with what I had just heard, letting it find its proper place inside me, not pushing it away, not reaching for it too hard, just letting it settle. Somewhere in Seattle, my daughter was sitting on the floor of a hotel room in a wedding dress, holding a piece of paper with one sentence on it. I hope she read it more than once. Some sentences take time to fully understand. By 3 in the afternoon on June 14th, the beach had filled up with the kind of noise that only exists in places where people have deliberately traveled to be happy children. Shrieking at the waterline. A group of college kids arguing cheerfully about whether a wave counted as rideable someone's portable speaker, playing something with a bass line that carried across the sand like a second heartbeat. Marcus came by with a fresh coffee without being asked. He set it down on the side table, looked at my phone, which had been lighting up every few minutes since noon, and tilted his head with the careful curiosity of someone deciding whether to ask. "Same calls," he said. "Different numbers now," I said. "Same general theme." He dropped into the empty chair beside mine with the easy familiarity of someone who had decided we were past formalities. You know you don't have to answer just because it keeps ringing. I know, I said. But you're thinking about it. I looked at him. He was maybe 25 with the kind of unhurried confidence that comes from spending your working hours somewhere beautiful. My daughter, I said. She's been calling since this morning. Marcus leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees, interested in the way young people are interested when they sense a real story. What happened? Her wedding was today, I said. I wasn't there. His eyebrows went up slowly. By choice. Very much by choice. He processed that for a moment, turning it over. She know that before this morning, she had some idea, I said. Not the full picture. Marcus whistled low. That's a lot of phone calls for someone who had some idea. My phone lit up again. Emily. Number 22. I looked at it, then looked at Marcus, then picked it up. He straightened immediately. You want me to? I held up one hand and pressed the green button. Emily's voice came through so loud and so raw that I had to hold the phone an inch from my ear. She wasn't crying, she was past crying. She was in that place beyond tears where the voice goes tight and flat and every word costs something. Dad. One word. Loaded like a freight train. Where are you? I'm in Maui, I said. I've been here since this morning. A sharp inhale. You planned this. You planned all of it. Her voice cracked on the last word, the tightness finally giving way. And what came through the fracture was not anger, but something raw and younger. The sound of someone who had just understood something that changed the shape of everything they thought they knew. The freeze order, the letter, Robert Hayes. You set all of this up. Yes, I said. Why? The word came out broken in the middle, split open by the weight of it. Dad, why would you do this to me today of all days? Why? I kept my voice level, not cold level. There is a difference, and it matters. Emily, I want you to do something for me. I want you to pick up the envelope I left on your vanity table and read the letter inside. I already read it. Her breath was coming in uneven bursts now, like someone trying to run and talk at the same time. I've read it 6 times. I don't understand what it means. Yes, you do, I said quietly. You understand it exactly. You just don't want to. A long, jagged silence on her end. The kind that isn't quiet at all, but full of something struggling to find its shape. Then she said in a voice so small, it barely made it through the connection. He's calling me. Ryan keeps calling. His parents are dead. His father is asking questions that I don't know how to answer. Then answer them honestly, I said. That's all you've ever had to do. You don't understand what you've done. Her voice broke completely on the last word, dissolving into a sob that she clearly hadn't meant to let out, the kind that comes up without permission from somewhere below strategy or composure. You've ruined everything. Everything I built, everything I worked for, Emily. My voice came out firmer than I intended, and I felt Marcus beside me go very still. Everything you built was built on something I paid for. That's not an accusation. That's just the truth. And you have always deserved to know the truth about your father. Dead air. Then the sound of her breathing, unsteady and ragged, working to find its rhythm. I have to go, she finally said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, scraped raw. Ryan needs me. I know, I said. Emily, I love you. That has not changed. That will not change, but I needed you to know who I am. The call ended. I held the phone in both hands for a moment, feeling the weight of it, light, impossibly light, for something that had just carried that much. Marcus had not moved. He was looking at me with wide eyes and the expression of someone who had underestimated what they were sitting next to. Sir, he said slowly, what exactly do you do? I set the phone down on the armrest. I used to be an engineer, I said. He stared at me for a long beat. Used to be, he repeated. That's what my son-in-law thought too, I said. Marcus looked out at the ocean, then back at me, then let out a breath that was halfway to a laugh. You want another coffee? I think I've earned one, I said. He stood up, shaking his head slowly, with the awed disbelief of someone who had just watched a very quiet person do something very large. I'll be right back, he said. I leaned back in my chair, tilted my face up toward the sun, and let the warmth press against my closed eyelids. The phone on the armrest stayed dark. The ocean kept going. And somewhere 3,000 miles away, my daughter was sitting in the wreckage of a day she had spent months building, holding a letter with one sentence on it, learning for the first time what it costs to spend a lifetime looking at someone without ever actually seeing them. Sunday evening, June 15th, I called Robert at 7 o'clock. He picked up before the second ring. I've been watching my phone since noon, he said, skipping any greeting the way he always did when a situation had moved past the stage where pleasantries were useful. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I said. Talk to me. Ryan moved fast, Robert said. Faster than I expected, honestly. He had a forensic financial investigation firm on retainer by Thursday afternoon. That's the same day as the wedding, Daniel. Before the reception, flowers were even cleaned up. I felt my jaw tighten. Which firm? Meridian Investigative Group out of Seattle. They specialize in corporate asset tracing, shareholder fraud detection, undisclosed financial relationships, the kind of work you hire when you're trying to find something that someone has deliberately hidden. A pause. He gave them everything. Your name, my name, the shell company structure, the original purchase date, every proxy vote I've cast on your behalf for 25 years. He told them to find anything tax irregularities undisclosed, conflicts of interest, improper influence on board decisions, anything that could be used to challenge the legitimacy of your shareholding. And I said, Robert let out a slow breath that carried something in it. Not relief, exactly, but the deep satisfaction of a man who had spent 30 years building something specifically to withstand this kind of pressure and was now watching it hold. They finished the preliminary report Friday evening. Full report delivered Saturday morning. He paused for effect in a way that told me he had been waiting to deliver this line. Daniel, their conclusion was 4 words: legally impenetrable, no vulnerabilities. Something unwound slightly in my shoulders. Walk me through it. Happily, Robert said, and I could hear the precision in his voice sharpening the voice he used in depositions when he knew exactly where every answer was going to land. The original purchase in 2000 was structured through Carter Technical Holdings, LLC, a legitimate Delaware corporation, with full documentation, proper capitalization, and clean tax filings going back 25 years. Every proxy vote I cast was properly authorized under the LLC operating agreement. Every SEC reporting threshold was met on time, including the 13D filing we did when you crossed 5% back in 2003. There is not a single transaction in 25 years that was late, improperly documented, or outside the boundaries of federal securities law. What about the freeze order? I said. Can they challenge it on procedural grounds? They tried, Robert said. Their legal team sent my office a 12-page letter Saturday arguing the notice was procedurally defective. I sent back a 4-page response referencing Delaware Code Section 242 and the company's own bylaws. He paused. They haven't replied. I stood up from the chair on my hotel balcony and walked to the railing. Looking out at the ocean, darkening in the evening light, the water shifting from turquoise to deep navy as the sun dropped toward the horizon. How did Ryan take the report? Badly, Robert said with the restrained candor of someone who was choosing their words carefully but wanted me to understand the full picture. My contact at the company's outside counsel told me Ryan called their managing partner directly on Saturday morning before 9 o'clock and asked whether there was any legal pathway to have your shares declared invalid on the grounds of undisclosed influence. Robert's voice dropped half a register. The managing partner told him no. Ryan apparently threw something against the wall of his office. A coffee mug, by one account. I rubbed the back of my neck slowly. And Emily has not engaged with my office directly, Robert said. But I understand from the same contact that she and Ryan spent most of Saturday in separate rooms of the apartment they share, which is not a promising sign for a couple who got married approximately 19 hours earlier. He hesitated. Daniel, I have to tell you something, and I want you to hear it as information rather than as judgment. Go ahead. Ryan is not finished. Robert said, his voice taking on the particular gravity he reserved for things he needed me to take seriously. The investigation came up empty, which means his next move will be something different. A man like Ryan, someone who has defined himself entirely by his ability to win, does not absorb a loss of this size and walk away. He is going to escalate. I don't know yet what form that takes, but I want you prepared. I gripped the balcony railing with both hands, feeling the cool metal under my palms. What's your read on the escalation? Could be legal, Robert said. A lawsuit alleging tortious interference with the merger. That's the legal term for deliberately and wrongfully disrupting a business deal. He'd argue your freeze order wasn't a legitimate exercise of shareholder rights, but an act of personal malice designed to damage him financially. Another pause. It would be a difficult case to win, but it would be expensive and disruptive for you to defend, which may be the point. And the other option, he goes after you personally, Robert said, and his voice went very quiet. Your reputation, your capacity. There are people who, when they can't win legally, try to reframe the entire situation in the court of public opinion. He drew a slow breath. I want you to be ready for anything, Daniel, because what Ryan lost this week wasn't just a merger. It was his entire plan for the next decade of his life. And people who lose things like that have a way of behaving in ways that surprise you. I stood there, with the ocean spread out below me, the last light going gold on the water, and felt the specific cold clarity of a man who has opened a door and is now fully committed to whatever is on the other side of it. Robert, I said, whatever comes next, I'm ready. I know you are, he said. That's the only reason I'm not more worried. He hung up. I stayed at the railing for a long time, watching the sun finish its descent below the horizon. The sky going from gold to copper to deep red, burning out slowly and completely, the way things do when they have used up everything they have. Somewhere in Seattle, Ryan Brooks was planning his next move. I intended to be several steps ahead of him when he made it. Before I tell you what Emily did next, something that genuinely shocked me, I need to know you're still here. Drop the number 9 in the comments right now. That's all. Just a 9. Because what's coming next is the moment everything stopped being private. A small note. The story ahead contains some fictional elements built for meaningful storytelling. If that's not for you, this is a perfectly good place to stop. No hard feelings. She filed the petition 10 days ago. I only found out this morning. She used a firm in Multnomah County that I don't have a relationship with, which means my usual channels didn't catch it early. I had been awake since 5 the way I always was, sitting at the small table by the window with my first coffee of the day and the morning light coming in flat and pale off the water. I turned the TV on out of habit. More than interest, I had been avoiding news for the past 10 days, the way you avoid touching a bruise you already know is there. But something made me stop on a Seattle affiliate, and there she was. Emily had chosen a pale blue dress, the kind that photographs well under studio lighting, soft and unthreatening, the visual language of someone who wants to be seen as reasonable. Her hair was down. Her hands were folded in her lap. She had been crying recently enough that her eyes still carried it, but the tears themselves had been carefully managed, leaving behind just enough redness to read as grief without crossing into hysteria. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Daughter seeks guardianship of father following erratic financial behavior." I set my coffee cup down with a click that was sharper than I intended. On screen, Emily leaned slightly toward the interviewer and spoke in a voice that was measured and trembling in exactly the right proportions. "My father is 69 years old," she said. "He lives alone. He has no support system around him, and in the past several weeks, he has made a series of financial decisions that are deeply out-of-character decisions that have caused significant harm to people I love." Her voice broke on the word love with the precision of someone who had rehearsed the break. "I'm not doing this out of anger. I'm doing this because I'm scared for him, because I love my father, and I don't recognize the man he's become." My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my back teeth. I picked up my phone and called Robert before the segment had even finished. He answered immediately. "I'm watching it," he said, his voice carrying the particular controlled tension of a lawyer who is furious and refusing to show it. "Don't say anything you'll regret. Let me talk first." "Talk fast," I said. "She filed the petition 8 days ago in Multnomah County. She used a firm in Bellevue that coordinated with a Portland associate. I don't have a relationship with, which means my usual channels didn't catch it early. The petition alleges diminished cognitive capacity based on the pattern of your recent financial decisions, specifically the freeze order, the withdrawal of the wedding venue guarantee, and what she's characterizing as a sudden and unexplained disappearance to Hawaii." I stood up from the table and walked to the window, pressing my free hand flat against the glass. Outside, the ocean was the same impossible blue it had been every morning. It had no opinion about any of this. "Robert," I said, "can she win?" "Not easily," he said, and I heard him pulling documents, the sound of paper moving across a desk. "To establish guardianship in Washington state, she needs to demonstrate to the court's satisfaction that you lack the capacity to manage your own affairs. That means a clinical evaluation, typically by a court-appointed psychiatrist, not just her testimony. The financial decisions she's citing are not evidence of diminished capacity. They are evidence of deliberate, legally executed decisions made through proper channels." "But it buys them time," I said. "Yes," Robert said, and his voice went flat with the weight of that single syllable. "If the court agrees to even open the proceeding, it creates a period of legal uncertainty during which your ability to exercise shareholder rights could be challenged in parallel litigation. It's not about winning. It's about slowing you down long enough for Ryan to find another angle." On the television across the room, Emily was still talking. I couldn't hear the words from where I was standing, but I could see her face, the careful performance of a daughter in distress, and something in my chest seized up with a pain that had nothing to do with legal strategy, and everything to do with the fact that this was my child, my own daughter, sitting in front of a camera and telling the world her father had lost his mind. "She doesn't believe what she's saying," I said. My voice came out rougher than I expected. "She knows I'm not Daniel." Robert's voice was gentle, but firm the way it got when he needed me to stay with the practical. "Whether she believes it or not, the petition exists, and the court will require a response. I need you to authorize me to engage a litigation team today. Not tomorrow. Today." I turned away from the window and looked at the television. The segment had ended. A weather forecast had replaced my daughter's face with a map of the Pacific Northwest, showing nothing but sunshine. "Authorize it," I said. "Done," Robert said. "There's something else." "Tell me." "I spoke to the court clerk this morning. The petition includes a request for an emergency temporary order that would freeze your ability to execute any new financial transactions while the proceeding is pending." He paused. "If the judge grants that temporary order before I can file our response, You would be legally restricted from purchasing additional shares until the hearing. My hand tightened around the phone until I could feel my pulse in my knuckles. When could the judge rule on the temporary order? As early as this week, Robert said, which means I need to file our response today with your authorization, and I need it to be airtight. Then make it airtight, I said. Robert, how long do I have before the temporary order becomes a realistic threat? 48 hours, he said. Maybe 72. I looked out at the ocean again. The same blue. The same endless, patient blue. Then we have work to do, I said. Get your team together. I'll call you back in an hour. I ended the call and stood in the quiet of the hotel room, the television murmuring in the background, the smell of coffee going cold on the table behind me. My daughter had just told the world her father was losing his mind. My son-in-law was somewhere in Seattle counting on that story to finish what his investigation couldn't. They were both about to discover that the 48 hours they thought they had was also 48 hours that I had, and I had never in my life wasted a single hour that belonged to me. Robert filed our response to the guardianship petition on the morning of June 25th, 22 hours after Emily's television appearance, 6 hours before the window for a temporary order would have opened. I know this because he called me the moment it was filed at 7:14 in the morning, Hawaiian time, and his voice carried the particular satisfaction of a man who has just beaten a deadline that mattered. It's done, he said. The response is on record. I've attached a full psychiatric evaluation from your physician of 18 years, your complete financial history, with annotations showing the deliberate and consistent nature of every major decision you've made since 2000. Legal brief arguing that the petition itself constitutes an improper attempt to weaponize the court system against a legitimate shareholder. He took a breath. The judge denied the emergency temporary order application 2 hours ago. I felt the tension I had been carrying in my shoulders for the past 22 hours release all at once like a cable finally going slack. Good, I said. That's very good, Robert. Now, he said, and his voice shifted into the register I had come to think of as his working voice, precise, forward-moving, no looking back. I need to ask you something directly. Are you still planning to buy? Yes, I said, even with the guardianship proceeding still open, even knowing that Ryan's team will be watching every public filing. Robert, I said, is there any legal reason I cannot purchase shares on the open market while the proceeding is pending and no order has been issued? A half-second pause. No, he said. As long as no temporary order is in effect, you retain full legal capacity. Every transaction is your right. Then we buy, I said, starting today. What followed was 2 months of the most disciplined, methodical work I had done since my engineering days, and I had always been very good at disciplined, methodical work. Every morning at 7 Hawaiian time, I called Robert. Every morning he gave me the same update in different numbers, and every morning I gave him the same instruction in different amounts. Morning, he said, on a Tuesday. In early July, the sound of his office coming alive in the background, coffee being poured, his assistant's voice in the outer room. We're at 26.1. I picked up another 80,000 shares through the Westfield account yesterday afternoon. The price moved up slightly around noon, but settled before close. Keep going, I said. What's Ryan doing? His legal team filed a motion last week arguing the guardianship petition should accelerate the freeze on your financial activity. Robert said, his voice carrying the dry precision of someone reciting something absurd with appropriate gravitas. The judge rejected it in 40 minutes. I've seen judges take longer to order lunch. I laughed at that genuinely, the kind of laugh that comes up from somewhere low and surprised. What about the merger partners, the investors who were at the wedding? 3 of the 6 have quietly withdrawn from preliminary discussions, Robert said. The other 3 are waiting to see how the shareholder situation resolves before they commit to anything. Ryan is hemorrhaging credibility, Daniel. Every time he files something and loses it costs him more than money. July became August. The calls continued. Some mornings Robert had good news. Some mornings he had complications, a trading day with unusual volume that required them to slow down a regulatory filing deadline that needed careful handling. One afternoon, when a block of shares they had been tracking was purchased by a different buyer, and Robert had to find an alternate route. I listened to all of it with the same patience I had brought to every difficult problem in my life. You do not rush a structure you are building to last. 29.4, Robert said on a Wednesday morning in late July, and I could hear the smile in his voice even though he was trying to keep it professional. We're closing in on 30. How is Emily? I asked, a shift in tone careful measured. She gave another interview last week. A print piece, not television this time. She's describing you as, and I'm quoting, a man who has allowed grief and isolation to distort his judgment. He paused. She mentioned Margaret. Something in my chest tightened and burned at the same time, the particular combination of grief and anger that is worse than either one separately. What did she say about her mother? She said that since Margaret's passing, you have become increasingly disconnected from reality. Robert said, his voice dropping lower. Daniel, I want you to know the litigation team has reviewed every statement she's made publicly. None of it meets the legal threshold for defamation because she's framing it as concern rather than accusation. But it is... He stopped. It's what I said. It's hard to read, he said quietly. Even for me. And I've been a lawyer for 31 years. I walked to the balcony and gripped the railing with both hands, staring out at the ocean. The August sun was high and brutal and beautiful, the water below it throwing light back in all directions, like it had too much of it and didn't know where to put it all. I thought about Margaret, the way she had said my name when she was dying, not with fear, but with the absolute certainty of someone who knew exactly where she was going and was simply making sure I heard it before she left. Keep buying, I said. My voice came out steady. Don't slow down. Understood, Robert said. The last call of August came on a Thursday evening. I was sitting on the balcony watching the sun drop toward the water when the phone rang. Robert's voice when he spoke had shed all its professional restraint and was carrying something raw and real underneath. Daniel, he said, we crossed 40% this morning. My hand tightened on the phone. How far over? 40.3, he said, and climbing. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of that number, not with triumph, not yet, but with the deep, slow satisfaction of a man watching something he had been building for a very long time finally reach the height he had planned for it. Outside, the sun touched the horizon, and the sky went gold. Keep going, Robert, I said. We're not done yet. I flew back to Portland on the morning of September 3rd, not because anyone forced me to, not because the situation demanded my physical presence in a way that couldn't be handled remotely. I flew back because there are moments when a man needs to be in his own house, sitting at his own table, drinking coffee from his own kitchen, and I had been away long enough that the need had become something I could feel in my bones, the way old injuries make themselves known before rain. Robert was waiting for me at the arrivals level of Portland International, which told me everything I needed to know about the severity of what he was carrying before he said a single word. In 31 years, Robert Hayes had never once met me at an airport. He was a man who communicated by phone, by email, by precisely worded letters delivered through proper channels. The fact that he was standing there in his charcoal overcoat with a leather folder under his arm and the expression of a doctor preparing to deliver a diagnosis meant that whatever was in that folder required a face. How bad, I said by way of greeting. He fell into step beside me toward the exit. Ryan filed on Monday, he said. Tortious interference with a prospective business relationship and intentional interference causing economic harm. He's claiming your freeze order directly and deliberately caused the collapse of the $480 million merger, destroyed the business relationships his company had spent 18 months building with the partner firms, and caused measurable damage to Brooks Construction Group's market valuation and his personal professional reputation. I pushed through the exit door into the sharp September air. How much is he asking for? The complaint doesn't specify a number yet, Robert said, matching my pace with the practiced ease of a man who had walked beside me through difficult conversations for 3 decades. Which means the number is going to be large enough that he wants to establish liability first before he puts it in print. My estimate somewhere between 30 and 60 million once they attach the full damages calculation. I stopped at the curb and turned to look at him directly. Robert, can he win? Robert opened the folder and handed me the top document, a copy of the complaint. 12 pages, Ryan's law firm's letterhead sharp and aggressive at the top. In a straightforward case, no, he said. A shareholder exercising a legally protected right, the right to object to and demand postponement of a major transaction, is what lawyers call privileged conduct. It means the act itself is protected from liability, even if it causes economic harm, because the law specifically grants shareholders that right. Ryan's legal team knows this. Then why file? I said. Robert's jaw tightened slightly, the micro-expression of a man who has seen this maneuver before and finds it contemptible. Because litigation is expensive and disruptive regardless of outcome, he said. Because it creates discovery obligations that require you to produce financial records, communications, and strategy documents. Because it gives Ryan's team the legal right to depose you, to sit you across a table and ask you questions under oath for hours at a time. He paused. And because if it goes badly enough for you in the public record, it gives the guardianship proceeding new ammunition. I looked down at the complaint in my hands. Ryan's name was on the first page as plaintiff, bold and formal. My name was below it as defendant in the same font, the same weight, as if we were equals in this, as if we had arrived at this moment by the same road. File the response, I said. Standard procedure. Don't rush and don't overreach. I want this resolved through the process, not around it. Already drafted, Robert said. I just needed your authorization in person. He took the complaint back from me and replaced it in the folder. There's something else. Of course there was. There was always something else. I had learned decades ago that bad news traveled in groups. Tell me. Ryan's deposition request came with a rider, Robert said, his voice dropping a register. They want to depose you within 30 days. And they've filed a motion requesting that the deposition be used as supporting evidence in the guardianship proceeding. He looked at me steadily. They're trying to use both cases to feed each other. If you appear confused or inconsistent in the deposition, it supports Emily's guardianship claim. If the guardianship claim creates enough legal uncertainty, it undermines your ability to defend the lawsuit. I felt the architecture of it settle over me, the elegant, ruthless efficiency of a trap, designed by someone who had thought carefully about how to build it. Ryan was not stupid. Reckless, yes. Arrogant, certainly, but not stupid. He had looked at the board and found the move that applied pressure from 2 directions at once. He's been busy, I said. He has, Robert said. I picked up my bag from the carousel that had just started moving and slung it over my shoulder. Around us, the airport went about its business reunions and departures, people moving in all directions with their particular weights of urgency and relief. A little girl near the exit was running full speed toward a man who dropped to his knees and caught her with both arms, lifting her off the ground, while she shrieked with the pure, uncomplicated joy of someone who had not yet learned to be careful about showing people how much they mattered. I watched them for a moment, then looked back at Robert. When's the deposition scheduled? They want October 2nd, Robert said. I can push it to October 10th if you need more time. October 10th is fine, I said. Robert, while they're building their case, what is there to stop me from continuing to purchase shares? Robert looked at me for a long moment, with the expression of a man doing rapid calculations. Nothing, he said slowly. The lawsuit doesn't restrict your financial activity. The guardianship proceeding hasn't resulted in an order. You are a free man with full legal capacity and full rights as a shareholder. I nodded once. Then I'll see you at the office tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock. Robert closed the folder and held it against his chest with both hands, studying me with the frank, unguarded attention he reserved for moments when he was genuinely trying to understand something. Daniel, he said, what exactly are you going to do? I looked out through the glass exit doors at the gray Portland sky, low clouds, the promise of rain, the familiar weight of a city I had lived in for 40 years, pressing back against me like something that knew me. Exactly what I've always done, I said. The right thing, at the right time, without making any noise about it. They arrived on the afternoon of September 10th, a Wednesday, at 20 minutes past 2. I heard the car pull into my driveway from the kitchen, where I was making lunch, the specific sound of tires on the gravel. I had laid myself 23 years ago distinctive enough that I could tell it wasn't a delivery and wasn't anyone from the neighborhood. I set down the knife I was using, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and walked to the front window. Emily got out of the passenger side first. She was wearing a gray coat I hadn't seen before. Her hair pulled back, and even from the distance of my front window I could see that she had been crying recently. Not the practiced television version, but the real kind, the kind that leaves a person looking like something has been wrung out of them. Ryan came around from the driver's side holding a bouquet of white roses that looked like it had been purchased from a good florist and handled carefully all the way from Seattle. I watched them walk up the front path for a moment. Then I went to open the door before they could knock. Emily's face when she saw me crumpled immediately, chin-trembling eyes flooding the lower lip, pulled in the way it had since she was 4 years old when she was trying not to cry and losing the fight. Dad, she said, her voice breaking completely on the single syllable. Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. She stepped forward and put her arms around me, and I held her because she was my daughter, because whatever had happened between us, she was still the person I had carried home from the hospital 34 years ago, and because the body remembers things the mind is still arguing about. Ryan stood on the porch behind her, with the white roses held in front of him like a shield. His expression carefully arranged into something that was trying to be remorse, and landing somewhere closer to the face a person makes when they are performing remorse for an audience. Daniel, he said, thank you for seeing us. I know we don't deserve it. I stepped back and gestured them both inside. We sat in the living room, Emily on the couch, with both hands wrapped around the mug of tea. I made her Ryan in the armchair across from me, the white roses in a vase on the coffee table between us that nobody was looking at. Emily talked for a long time. She talked about the wedding, about the months before it, about the email she had sent in February, with a rawness in her voice that made my chest ache in ways I hadn't expected. She talked about Margaret, about growing up, about the shame she had carried, about our circumstances for years, without ever examining where it came from or whether it was deserved. She was not performing any of it. The pain in her voice was real. The tears were real, and sitting across from her in my own living room, watching her come apart with genuine regret, I felt something in me that wanted badly to simply receive it and let it be enough. But Ryan's left hand had not moved from his jacket pocket since he sat down. I had noticed it the moment he settled into the chair. A small thing, the kind of detail an engineer notices, because an engineer spends a career understanding that small anomalies in a system usually mean something. His right hand was free, resting on his knee. His left hand was inside the jacket pocket. Fingers wrapped around something he was holding still, very deliberately. I waited. I let Emily finish. When she finally took a breath and looked at me with her red-rimmed eyes full of the exhausted hope of someone who had said everything they had to say, I reached over and put my hand briefly over hers on the mug. Emily, I said gently, I hear you, I do. Then I looked across at Ryan. I had noticed it within the first minute, the way his left hand had not moved from his jacket pocket since he sat down. Fingers wrapped around something with the particular stillness of a man trying very hard to appear relaxed. 30 years of engineering had taught me that when one part of a system behaves differently from every other part, it means something. Ryan, I said in a completely different tone, calm, direct, carrying no heat and no apology. Would you please take your hand out of your jacket pocket and put whatever you're holding on the coffee table? The color drained from Ryan's face so fast it was almost medical. His jaw went rigid. Emily looked at him sharply, confusion, and then dawning horror moving across her expression, like weather across a landscape. Ryan, she said, her voice suddenly very small. What is he talking about? Ryan pulled his hand out of his pocket. In it was a compact digital voice recorder, small black, the kind you could buy at any electronics store. He set it on the coffee table next to the white roses with the slow, deliberate movement of a man who has been caught and is trying to decide in real time how to respond to that. Emily stared at the recorder. Then she put both hands over her mouth and made a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a word. Something raw and crushed from somewhere deep in her throat, the sound of a person watching themselves do something unforgivable. Emily, Ryan started. I was just, don't, she said. Her voice had gone flat and hard in a way I had never heard from her before. Don't say a single word right now. I looked at Ryan steadily. Oregon is a two-party consent state, I said. That means recording a conversation without the knowledge and agreement of all parties present is a criminal violation under state law. If that recorder has been running since you walked in, you have committed a crime in my house. I paused to let that land. I'm not going to call the police today, but I want you to understand very clearly that the recording, if it exists, is inadmissible in any legal proceeding and is itself evidence of bad faith that I can use in the lawsuit you filed against me. Ryan's hands were shaking now, a fine, barely visible tremor in the fingers he had placed flat on his knees. His face had moved through shock and settled into something that looked like a man staring at the consequences of his own choices and finding them significantly larger than he had expected. There was also a document, I said, in your inside jacket pocket, a transfer agreement, I imagine. Ryan said nothing. His throat worked. You don't need to confirm it, I said. Robert Hayes will be in contact with your legal team tomorrow morning regarding the recorder. I'd suggest you speak to your attorney before that call. I stood up, signaling with the unhurried finality of a man in his own home that the visit had concluded. Emily, please take the roses. They're beautiful and none of this is their fault. Emily stood on legs that were barely holding her, her face wet and devastated, her hands shaking as she lifted the vase from the table. She looked at me with eyes that were asking a question she didn't have words for yet. We'll talk, I said quietly, but not today. She nodded once, a small broken movement, and walked to the door. Ryan followed without speaking, without looking at me, the recorder still sitting on my coffee table, where he had left it, like evidence of something he could no longer take back. I closed the front door and stood in my hallway with my hand still on the knob. Outside, I heard the car start, heard the tires on the gravel, heard the sound fade down the street until there was nothing left but the ordinary quiet of a September afternoon in Portland. I picked up my phone and called Robert. They came, I said. He had a recorder, Oregon two-party consent, and there was a transfer agreement. Robert exhaled sharply, the sound of a man both unsurprised and deeply frustrated. Are you all right? I looked around my living room, the familiar chairs, the books, the photograph of Margaret on the shelf that had watched the whole thing. Yes, I said. Accelerate the timeline, Robert. I want to be ready for the shareholder meeting. Robert called me at 6:47 in the morning on the 18th of September, and I could hear the courthouse traffic already bleeding through his phone car horns. A distant siren, the particular hollow echo of a marble lobby. "Daniel," he said, and even that single word carried something I hadn't heard from Robert in 31 years of friendship. It carried relief. "Robert." I pressed the phone harder against my ear. My chest felt like something had been sitting on it for weeks and was only now slowly beginning to lift. "Tell me." Judge Patricia Harmon denied the petition. He exhaled so loudly I could hear his shoulders drop. "Denied it in full. No emergency protective order, no temporary conservatorship, no restricted access to your accounts. Everything they filed thrown out." My knees went soft. I was standing on the balcony of my Maui rental, still in yesterday's shirt, and I had to grip the railing with both hands because my legs genuinely refused to hold me steady. 69 years old, and a judge's decision could still make me feel like the ground was tilting underneath my feet. "How did she rule?" I managed. "She said," and I'm reading directly from her bench statement. Here she said, "The petitioner has presented no credible medical evidence, no documented financial mismanagement, and no testimony from qualified professionals to support a finding of diminished capacity. The motion appears motivated by personal interests rather than the welfare of the respondent." I pressed my fist against my mouth. My eyes burned. I would not cry, not yet, but my throat tightened around something that felt enormous, something that had been lodged there for weeks. "Personal interests?" I repeated. My voice came out rougher than I intended. Her exact words. Robert's voice gentled. "Daniel Ryan's legal team threw everything at this. They brought a financial analyst who tried to argue your stock purchases were erratic behavior. They brought a clinical psychologist, paid expert, obviously, who testified he was concerned about your decision-making after the wedding." Judge Harmon looked at that psychologist for about 10 seconds and asked him when he last examined you in person. The answer was never. She excused him from the stand and moved on. A sound escaped me, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, somewhere in between. I turned away from the ocean and sat down hard on the balcony chair, staring at the potted fern. Margaret would have loved the one I'd bought at a farmer's market 3 weeks ago just to have something living nearby. "She never met me," I said. "The psychologist. He testified about my mental state, and he'd never once sat across from me." "That's what killed their case," Robert said. "That, and the fact that your shares were purchased through completely standard brokerage channels, every transaction logged, every disclosure filed properly with the SEC. There was nothing erratic about it. It was systematic. It was methodical. And it was completely 100% legal." I breathed in slowly. The trade winds off the Pacific moved through the palm fronds below my balcony, and I thought about Margaret, the way she used to put both palms flat on a table when she was relieved, like she was checking the world was still solid beneath her hands. "What about Emily?" My voice cracked on her name. I couldn't help it. She was still my daughter, regardless of everything. "Was she there?" "She was." Robert paused. "She sat in the front row. She was crying before the ruling even came down. When Judge Harmon made the denial official, Emily put her face in her hands. That hit me somewhere deep and raw and old. I pressed my palm against my sternum because my heart was actually aching. Not metaphorically, not poetically, but physically hurting the way grief sometimes does when it's been compressed too long and finally finds a crack to move through. "And Ryan?" Ryan stood up immediately. His attorney grabbed his arm before he could say anything. He sat back down, but his face was... Robert chose his words carefully. His face was a color I've never seen on a person before. "I almost felt sorry for him. Almost." "Robert," I said quietly. "Did Emily look over at anyone? Did she say anything after?" "She said one thing." Another pause. "When she was walking out, I was near the door. She stopped for a second and she said, "Where is he?" Just to herself. Not to anyone in particular. Just into the air. The burning in my eyes got worse. I stood up and walked to the railing again, facing the ocean, because I needed something massive and ancient to look at when emotions this size moved through me. "Where is he?" I repeated. "She knows you love her, Daniel. Somewhere under all of this, she knows. Maybe." I let the word sit there. Or maybe she just realized the man she tried to erase has more power than she counted on. Both things can be true. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Both things could be true. A father's love and a father's boundaries, not opposites, not enemies. Just two things that could exist in the same chest at the same time without destroying each other. "What's next?" I asked, rolling my shoulders back, feeling something settle in my spine. "That," Robert said. And now his voice carried something entirely different. Something careful and weighted and almost electric. "Is exactly what I need to talk to you about. Because something happened this morning. Something I did not expect." My hand tightened on the railing. "Tell me." "Not on this call," Robert said. "I'm sending you a name. Check your messages in 5 minutes." The line went quiet. I stared at the ocean pulse ticking steadily in my throat and waited. The name Robert sent me was 2 words, Richard Brooks. I read it 3 times, standing in my kitchen, coffee getting cold on the counter beside me. Richard Brooks. The founder. The chairman. The man who had built a construction empire from a single permit office in Tacoma 40 years ago and turned it into the company that was now legally and irrevocably more mine than anyone else's in the world, though he didn't know that last part yet. Not all of it, anyway. My phone rang before I could decide what to think. The number was a Seattle area code I didn't recognize, and my pulse kicked hard in my chest. I answered on the 3rd ring. "Mr. Carter." The voice was deep, unhurried, and carried the particular authority of a man who had spent decades in boardrooms. "My name is Richard Brooks. I believe you know who I am." "I do," I said. I kept my voice level the way I used to when a machine was misbehaving on the floor, and panic was the worst possible response. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks." "I'm going to skip the pleasantries," he said, "because I suspect you'd prefer that." "I would." "Good." A short exhale. "I've spent the last 3 months trying to understand who you are. I hired 3 separate research teams. I pulled every public record. I had my attorneys review the original share agreement from 2000. And I want to tell you something, Mr. Carter, that I don't say easily." He paused. "I owe you an apology. That was not what I expected." My fingers tightened around the phone. Out on my balcony, a gust moved through the palms, and I could hear the ocean 3 floors below, low and constant and ancient. "An apology," I said carefully. 25 years ago, my company was 48 hours from insolvency." His voice didn't waver, but there was something underneath it. Not shame exactly, but the kind of weight a man carries when he finally says a true thing out loud after years of walking around it. "Robert Hayes brought your proposal to me. $3 million, no public acknowledgement, no board seat, no operational role. I accepted because I had no other option. And then the company survived and grew, and I told myself the arrangement was professional. That anonymity was your preference. That I owed you nothing more than the legal agreement we'd signed. You honored the agreement," I said. "I honored the letter of it." A beat. Not the spirit. I never once asked Robert how you were. I never sent a note. When the company went public, when we crossed $1 billion in revenue, when we celebrated 20 years, I never thought about the man who made it possible because it was easier not to. He stopped. "That was wrong, and I am sorry." I sat down at my kitchen table. My throat was doing that thing it had been doing for months, tightening around something too large to swallow, too significant to push aside. "Mr. Brooks," I said, "why are you calling me today, specifically today, the morning after the guardianship ruling?" He didn't hesitate. Because yesterday Judge Harmon denied my son's petition. Because Robert Hayes has informed me that you currently hold 40.3% of Brooks Construction's outstanding shares, and that number is still moving. Because the $480 million merger I have spent 2 years building is frozen legally by your action. And because his voice shifted, dropped half a register, became something more human and less corporate. Because I read the letter you left for my son on his wedding day, and I understood for the first time exactly what kind of man I had been doing business with for 25 years without ever knowing his name. My eyes stung. I pressed the heel of my hand against my forehead and tried to breathe evenly, tried to be the steady man I had always been. But Richard Brooks had just said something that cracked through every careful wall I had built around myself since February. What did the letter say to you? I asked. The part that mattered most. You wrote, he said slowly, as if reciting something he'd memorized. I did not invest in your father's company to gain power. I invested because I believed in something worth building. I still do. The difference is that now I believe in building it correctly. A pause. That sentence told me more about you than 3 months of research. The tears came then. I couldn't stop them. I pressed my fist against my mouth and let them run down my face, hot and quiet. And 25 years in the making. For Margaret, who never got to see any of this, for Emily, who somewhere in a Seattle apartment was probably staring at a ceiling and wondering where everything went wrong, for the younger version of me, who wrote a check for $3 million and asked for nothing in return. Mr. Carter, Richard said, and his voice was careful now, I want to propose a meeting. A private one. No attorneys, no board members, no Ryan, just the two of us. I want to discuss the merger, your shares, and if you're willing, what comes next. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. Outside, the Pacific was enormous and blue and completely indifferent to the fact that a 69-year-old retired mechanical engineer from Portland was sitting at a kitchen table in Maui, crying into the morning light. I'll need to think about it, I said. Of course. He was quiet for a moment, then softer. For what it's worth, Mr. Carter, I think my son married the wrong woman for the wrong reasons, and I think her father deserved far better than what he received. Something shifted in my chest, not relief exactly, not yet. Something older and more fragile than relief. I'll call you Thursday, I said. And when I set the phone down, I sat there for a long time listening to the ocean, feeling something that might, if I was careful with it, become hope. Robert called me on the 2nd of October at exactly 8 minutes past noon, and I knew before he said a single word that something had changed. I could hear it in the way he breathed, that particular slow inhale a man takes when he is carrying news too significant to rush. Daniel. His voice was steady, but underneath it something was trembling like a bridge after a truck has passed. I need you to sit down. I'm already sitting. I was at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and the crossword I hadn't managed to finish in 3 days. I set the pen down. Tell me. As of market close yesterday, October 1st, Robert said, your total holdings in Brooks Construction Group represent 51.2% of all outstanding shares. The number landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water, slow rings spreading outward from the center, touching everything. Say that again, I said. Not because I hadn't heard him, because I needed to hear it twice to understand it was real. 51.2%. He let the number breathe. Daniel, you are the majority shareholder of Brooks Construction. You control the company. My hand was shaking. I looked down at it wrapped around the coffee mug and watched my own fingers trembling against the ceramic. And I thought, this is what 25 years of patience looks like from the outside. Just a 69-year-old man with shaking hands sitting at a kitchen table in Maui. Robert, I said, and my voice cracked straight down the middle. Margaret would have laughed herself to tears. He made a sound that was half laugh half something rougher. She absolutely would have. She'd have said you always did things backwards, quiet first, loud later. She said that about my engineering reports, too. I pressed the heel of my palm against my eyes because they were burning. Because after everything, the email with 25 conditions, the wedding morning, the 65 missed calls, I never answered the lawsuit, the guardianship petition, the months of buying shares one careful block at a time. After all of it, the number 51.2 had arrived as quietly as a tide coming in. How did it happen this fast? I thought we were looking at November. Ryan's legal team filed a motion last week to freeze your share purchases pending the tortious interference case, Robert said, and I could hear him moving the particular creak of his office chair. The motion was denied on Monday. When the denial came through, two of the institutional investors who'd been watching the litigation decided the legal risk of staying aligned with Ryan's faction was too high. They sold. I bought. 3 separate purchases over 36 hours. You moved fast. I moved the moment the window opened. A beat. That's what you pay me for. I laughed, a real one, raw and sudden, the kind that surprises you when it comes out. Robert, I pay you an embarrassingly modest retainer for a man who just handed me control of a billion-dollar company. The retainer, he said, and now he was laughing too, is something we are absolutely going to discuss at our next meeting. I stood up from the table and walked to the balcony because I needed air, needed the ocean to be in front of me when I processed this. The Pacific was its usual enormous self, vast and blue, and entirely unbothered by the fact that a retired mechanical engineer from Portland had just become the controlling shareholder of Brooks Construction Group. What happens now? I asked. Legally, I mean. What does 51.2% actually let me do? It lets you do almost everything, Robert said. You can call a special shareholder meeting. You can block any resolution that requires a simple majority, including the $480 million merger. You can, if you choose, replace board members. You have effective control over the strategic direction of the company. He paused. Ryan Brooks's position as VP is technically secure. Employment decisions aren't made at shareholder level, but his influence over the merger is gone. He has no path to pushing that deal through without your vote. The merger. $480 million frozen since June 14th. I thought about Ryan sitting across from me at that Portland restaurant in May, casually mentioning it, like a man showing off a watch he was proud of. We're announcing a $480 million acquisition at the wedding reception, Mr. Carter. Bit of a milestone for the company. He hadn't known then. He hadn't known that the man he was talking to owned nearly a quarter of every dollar he was describing. What does Richard know? I asked. Richard knows the share count as of this morning, Robert said. I sent formal notification to the company's registered agent at 9 a.m. per SEC disclosure requirements. Richard will have seen it by now. He lowered his voice slightly. He called my cell at 9:47. I didn't answer. I wanted to talk to you first. My chest tightened in a different way now, not grief, not pain, but something anticipatory and sharp. Richard Brooks, 68 years old, founder of everything, sitting in his corner office in Seattle, reading a document that told him the quiet man from Portland now owned more of his company than he did. What do you think he's feeling right now? I asked. Robert considered this. I think he's feeling the specific kind of reckoning that arrives when a man realizes the debts he thought were settled were never settled at all. A beat. But I also think, based on the conversation you described, the apology he offered, that Richard Brooks is a man capable of facing a reckoning without running from it. Unlike his son, I said quietly. Unlike his son, Robert agreed. I gripped the balcony railing and stared at the water. A parasailer was drifting far out over the bay, suspended between ocean and sky, going exactly nowhere in the most peaceful way imaginable. I thought about the meeting Richard had proposed. Thursday, I had said. I had called him Thursday. We had spoken for 40 minutes about the merger, about the company's future, about a possible path through the legal freeze. He had been measured and honest and nothing like I expected. "Robert," I said, "schedule the shareholder meeting." A pause. Then carefully, "Daniel, are you sure? Once we file notice, there's no quiet way out of this. The financial press will pick it up within 24 hours. Your name, your actual name, becomes public." I thought about Margaret. I thought about Emily asking, "Where is he?" in an empty courthouse hallway. I thought about the 25 conditions on a screen in my home office at 11 at night. Condition number 25 reading, "After the wedding, please remove yourself from our lives." "I've been quiet for 25 years, I said. "I think that's long enough." "I'll file the notice tomorrow morning," Robert said. "The meeting will be set for October 15th. "October 15th, I repeated. After I hung up, I stood on that balcony for a long time, and the shaking in my hands gradually stopped. The morning of October 15th arrived, the way consequential mornings often do, without ceremony, without fanfare, with nothing but gray Seattle sky pressing flat against the hotel window, and the smell of coffee I had made too strong. I had flown in the night before. Not from Maui. I had left Maui 3 days earlier, spent a night in Portland, walking through my own house like a stranger, relearning the layout, touching the spines of Margaret's books on the shelf in the study, standing in the kitchen doorway at midnight, just listening to how quiet a house could be when everything important had already moved on. The Brooks Construction headquarters was on the 32nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Seattle, the kind of building that tells you it's serious about itself before you even reach the lobby. I arrived at 8:45 for a 9 o'clock meeting because I had been a mechanical engineer for 30 years, and showing up early was the only habit I'd never managed to break. The receptionist, a young woman named Claire, according to her badge, looked up when I came through the glass doors in my plain gray suit, the same one I'd bought for Margaret's sister's retirement dinner 4 years ago. "Good morning," she said, politely uncertain. "Can I help you?" "Daniel Carter," I said. "I have a 9 o'clock. Something moved across her face, recognition. Then something more complicated. Then the professional smoothing that young people in corporate environments learn very quickly. "Of course, Mr. Carter. I'll let them know you've arrived. Can I get you anything while you wait? Water, coffee?" "Coffee would be wonderful, thank you." I smiled at her, and I meant it. None of this was her doing. Robert was already in the lobby when I turned from the reception desk, his briefcase in one hand and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. And when he saw me, his whole face shifted into something warm and worried and proud all at once. "You look exactly like yourself," he said. "Is that a compliment?" "Today," he grabbed my shoulder briefly, "it's the highest compliment I can offer." We rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, and I watched the lobby shrink below us through the glass wall, and I thought about 25 years ago when I had wired $3 million into an account belonging to a company I had never visited, run by a man I had never met, because Robert had said, "Daniel, this company is worth saving," and I had believed him. The elevator opened into a corridor that smelled of carpet and climate control and the particular kind of nervous energy that gathers before important meetings. A young man in a dark suit was waiting for us. "Mr. Carter, Mr. Hayes." He gestured down the hall. "They're ready for you in the main boardroom." They. I noted the word. Not he. Not Richard alone. Robert leaned close as we walked. "Ryan is in there," he murmured. "He wasn't supposed to be. Richard told me this morning he insisted." "Of course he did," I said, and I kept walking. The boardroom door was heavy dark wood, and when the young man opened it, I felt the temperature of the room before I saw anything. The particular chill of a space full of people who have been waiting and are not comfortable about it. The table was long and dark, 12 chairs on each side, and most of them were filled. Board members I had never met, faces I recognized from annual reports Robert had forwarded me over the years. At the far end, Richard Brooks was standing, not seated, standing, and he looked exactly as he had sounded on the phone, a man in his late 60s who had built something large and was now genuinely uncertain whether it was going to survive the morning. Beside him, Ryan Brooks was seated jaw tight, both hands flat on the table. When he saw me walk through the door, the color drained from his face so fast I actually watched it happen, watched the blood leave his cheeks like something retreating. "Mr. Carter?" Richard came around the end of the table with his hand extended, and his grip, when we shook, was firm and dry and deliberate. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me, Mr. Brooks." I held his gaze, and what I saw there wasn't hostility. It was the face of a man doing something hard and choosing to do it correctly. Ryan stood slowly. His voice, when it came, was controlled. I could hear the effort it took. "Mr. Carter? Ryan?" I looked at him directly, and I let the full weight of everything, the restaurant in May, the letter he opened on his wedding morning, the 65 calls I never answered, sit between us without apology. He swallowed. His throat moved visibly. "I didn't know," he said, "about the shares, about any of it. I want you to know that." "I know you didn't," I said simply. Something flickered in his eyes. He had expected a different answer, something harder, something with an edge. I watched him recalibrate. Richard guided me to a seat near the head of the table, and as I settled into the chair, the room adjusted around me, chairs shifting, papers straightening the quiet organizational chaos of people who have just understood that the power arrangement they came in with is not the power arrangement that exists. "Gentlemen," Robert said, opening his briefcase and setting a bound document on the table. "As of October 2nd, my client Daniel Carter holds 51.2% of Brooks Construction Group's outstanding shares, duly registered and disclosed per all applicable SEC requirements." He slid copies down both sides of the table. "He is, as of this morning, the majority shareholder and the largest single controlling interest this company has ever had. The purpose of today's meeting is to discuss the path forward, specifically the status of the $480 million merger, the company's governance structure, and any further business Mr. Carter wishes to address." The room was utterly, completely still. Not one person moved. I could hear the climate control system humming above the ceiling tiles. Richard was watching me from across the table. His eyes were the color of worn granite, and they were steady and clear, and asking a question he hadn't yet put into words. I reached into my jacket pocket and set a single folded sheet of paper on the table in front of me. "I have one item," I said. "One item only for now." Every set of eyes in that room dropped to the folded paper. Ryan's hands, still flat on the table, were no longer still. His fingers were pressing so hard into the wood, I could see the white around his knuckles from where I sat. I left the paper folded. "Before we discuss business," I said, "I'd like to say something. To this room. To the people who built this company." I looked at Richard. "And to the man who forgot for 25 years to ask how I was doing." Richard's jaw moved. His eyes were bright. "I did not come here for revenge," I said. "I came here for something far more expensive than that." Every pair of eyes in that boardroom was fixed on the folded sheet of paper I had placed on the table. 12 board members, Richard Brooks at the far end, Ryan beside him with his jaw so tight I thought his teeth might crack, and Robert to my right, wearing the careful, neutral expression of a man who already knows the ending. I picked up the paper, unfolded it slowly the way a man unfolds something he has been carrying for a very long time. 25 years ago, I said I wired $3 million into a company I had never visited. I asked for no credit, no title, no chair at this table. I looked around the room, not at Ryan, not yet, but at the board members who had genuinely helped build something worth building. I asked for one thing only, a fair return handled quietly and correctly. I set the paper flat. Everything I did after June 14th was a response to a failure of basic human decency, not a failure of business. The room went airless. Nobody moved. Ryan's knuckles were white against the tabletop. "Mr. Carter," Robert said, "would you like to read the document?" "Yes." I looked down at the single page. "This is a letter addressed to this board dated October 2nd, the same day my shareholding reached 51.2%. I began to read. "To the Board of Directors of Brooks Construction Group, I write not as an adversary, but as the person who believed in this company before most of you knew it existed. I froze the $480 million merger not to destroy it, but to be seen. I bought shares not to take control, but to have a voice. I have been invisible for 25 years by choice. I am choosing today to be visible. What I do with that visibility depends entirely on what this room does next." I set the paper down. Richard exhaled low and rough from somewhere deep in his chest. His hand went to his mouth. His eyes were red at the edges, and I watched him blink hard against something he clearly hadn't prepared to feel today. Ryan pushed back from the table and stood. His voice came out thin and strained. "You froze a $480 million deal because my wife didn't want you at her wedding." "Sit down, Ryan." Richard's voice cut across the room like a blade. "Dad, sit down." No raised volume, no theater. Just 40 years of authority compressed into 2 words. Ryan sat chest-heaving, eyes glassy, fighting something complicated that he hadn't expected to find inside himself this morning. "Mr. Carter," board member Patricia Walsh leaned forward, her voice measured. "Is it your intention to permanently block the merger?" "No," I said. The tension rearranged itself. "The merger has structural problems unrelated to me personally," I continued. "The target company carries $300 million in contingent liability that was never disclosed in the initial due diligence summary. I froze the vote because a deal of this size with that liability hidden would have damaged this company and everyone whose livelihood depends on it." I met her eyes directly. "I am not here to burn down what took 25 years to build. I am here because I was asked to disappear, and I decided respectfully not to." Patricia Walsh sat back. She looked at Richard. Something moved between them. History, professional respect, and the exhausted relief of a crisis, revealing itself smaller than feared. Richard stood, broad through the shoulders even at 68. When he rose, the room instinctively organized itself around him the way it always had. He walked the length of the table, unhurried, deliberate, and stopped directly in front of me. "I owe you an apology." His voice was steady, but his eyes were bright and full and cracking open in real time. "Not the one I gave you on the phone. A real one. In front of these people." He swallowed hard. "I took your money 25 years ago, built a legacy on it, and never once said your name out loud. Not to my board, not to my son, not to anyone." A pause that carried genuine weight. "That was deeply, inexcusably wrong, and I am sorry." My throat tightened until I had to press my lips together and breathe through it carefully. My eyes burned hot. I had not expected this, not here, not in front of 12 people, not delivered with this much plainness. "Richard," I said, my voice rougher than I wanted, "I accept your apology." He extended his hand. I stood and took it, not the professional grip from the doorway, but the kind 2 old men exchange when they have finally, at enormous cost, told each other the truth. Across the table, Ryan's shoulders were shaking. Head-bent hands flat on the table, and what moved through my chest was not triumph. Not even close. It was sorrow. "Ryan," I said. He looked up, eyes wet, jaw working hard. "I don't want your company," I said. "I wanted my daughter to look at me the way she did when she was 9, running down the hallway in her socks and crashing straight into me." My voice broke on that last word. Just a hairline fracture. But everyone in that room heard it. That's all I ever wanted. He stared at me, a 36-year-old man, only now understanding the full weight of choices he could not undo. "Mr. Carter," he said quietly, "I don't know how to fix this." "Neither do I," said. "But that's not something we solve today." I folded the letter and put it back in my pocket. "Robert," I said, "let's talk about the merger." The meeting lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. When it ended, the $480 million merger was tabled pending proper due diligence, my condition accepted unanimously. The freeze lifted. Ryan's lawsuit evaporated before close of business, which Robert told me was the fastest he had ever seen a legal action disappear. I was heading toward the elevator when Richard caught up with me, slightly out of breath, moving faster than a 68-year-old man with a bad knee probably should. "Daniel, 5 minutes." Robert touched my arm. "I'll get the car." And just like that, he gave us the hallway. Richard stopped beside me. The chairman's composure he had worn in the boardroom was gone. What replaced it was something tired, loosened, and far more human. He looked like a man who had been carrying something very heavy and had only just been given permission to set it down. "I want to offer you a board seat," he said. "Full voting rights. Every major decision, mergers, acquisitions, strategy. Everything." He stopped. The offer should have been made 25 years ago. My chest ached, not painfully, but with the tenderness of something old and bruised finally being touched with care. I thought about what that offer would have meant when I was 44, when Margaret was alive, when Emily was 9 and running down the hallway in her socks. "Richard," I said, "I'm 69 years old. I have a garden in Portland that's completely out of control. I have Margaret's books in a study nobody has dusted since June. I have a crossword puzzle I've been failing to finish for 3 days." I looked at him directly. "I am not a board member. I am a mechanical engineer from Portland who made a decision 25 years ago and has spent every day since being exactly who he always was." Something cracked open in Richard's expression, grief and admiration arriving at the same moment. "Then tell me what you want," he said, his voice rough. "Anything. 3 things." I held his gaze. "The merger gets reviewed correctly, not fast correctly. Robert Hayes gets a direct line to this board always. And—" My voice broke without warning, sudden and sharp. I looked away toward the window at the end of the corridor, at the gray Seattle sky. "Tell Emily her father is fine, that he's not angry, that he understands she was young and scared and trying to build something she was proud of, and that he loves her the same as he always did. I can't tell her myself yet, but I need her to know I didn't disappear because I stopped caring." Richard's eyes were wet. He blinked hard. "I'll call her tonight. Thank you." He extended his hand one final time. "I am glad you were the one who saved us. In 2000. And I am glad you are the person you turned out to be." "So am I said. Downstairs, Robert was waiting with both our coats. When I told him about the board seat, his eyebrows shot up. And I told him about the crossword puzzle. He stared at me for 3 full seconds. Then he laughed. Sudden, unguarded bouncing off the marble ceiling, and I laughed with him. And something that had been wound unbearably tight for months finally gratefully let go. Outside, the Seattle air was cold and clean. I pulled out my phone. 65 missed calls sitting untouched since June 14th. 4 months of evidence I had walked past every single day without addressing. I opened the log, scrolled to the top, pressed delete. All of them gone. The phone showed 0 missed calls. The first drops of rain touched my face and I tipped my head back for just a moment to feel them. "How does that feel?" Robert asked. "Like October," I said. "Like something that's finally over and like something that might, if I'm careful with it, be a beginning." We walked to the car. I did not look back. People always ask me, was it worth it? 69 years on this earth, and I still come back to something my mother used to say. God doesn't give you a heavy load without first building strength into your back. I didn't understand that when I was 44 writing a check for $3 million in a quiet room with nobody watching. I understand it now standing in Seattle rain with 65 deleted calls and the lightest phone I've ever held. Here is the truth. I wish someone had told me sooner dignity is not the same as silence. I spent 25 years being invisible because I thought that was the humble thing. It wasn't. It was just fear wearing a quieter coat. If this family story has taught me anything, it's that the people who love you should never have to wonder whether you exist. So don't do what I did. Don't wait 25 years to be seen. Don't let anyone hand you a list of 25 conditions for your own worth and call it love. Speak sooner. Set boundaries before they become wounds. The people who truly belong in your life will not need you to disappear. They will pull up a chair and make room. Every Grandpa Stories channel will tell you that old men are full of regret. Maybe. But the ones worth listening to are full of something harder earned than regret. They're full of perspective. And mine is, this power means nothing if the person you love doesn't know your name. This has been one of my favorite Grandpa Stories to share. And if this family story moved you, touched something real, or reminded you of someone you should call tonight, leave a comment below, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Your presence on this journey means more than you know. Thank you truly for staying until the very last word. And one small note before you go, the stories ahead contain certain fictional elements crafted purely to illuminate real human truths. If that's not the kind of family story you're looking for, no hard feelings at all, step away, find what feeds your soul, and come back whenever you're ready. This door is always open.